Father Mayo and the Associated Collective. Life in winter for a pair of young teenage boys can be pretty boring. My childhood home in the Isle of Wight was certainly no exception. In fact, in this particular place, it's the complete opposite of the bustling summer, which is full of fun and hundreds of thousands of visitors. My story turns the clock back to the early 1970s and a run-of-the-mill November evening when the lack of entertainment left me and my friends staring into an abyss which felt like it might last an eternity. As such, I have to admit to a back catalogue of deeds so numerous that until now it's felt almost pointless seeking any sort of forgiveness. However, as time moves on, and the Grim Reaper has started to come for some of my peers, I think I'd better make a start so as to improve my prospects for the future.
This is very macabre.
It is. He's looking to the afterlife already. I don't want to use our real names, as we now have boys of our own. Hence, if they should ever perpetrate similar deeds, we may need to rely on the moral high ground in order to hand out just punishment. Plus, there are some families that might still remember. So for the purposes of this confession, we'll make up these names of Casey and Jones. Most winter nights, Simon, we would arrange to meet at about 6 o'clock by our local telephone box, and as long as our mums had agreed that we could go to the other's home for the evening, we were then free to start our programme of misdeeds. Around 1973, we decided that we would walk our local neighbourhood in search of front gardens with gnomes. On finding these, we would usually do one of two things. If there are a lot of gnomes and other accessories, we would typically transfer the whole garden display to the plainest looking garden nearby. If there are only one or two, we would swap one of them for another from another garden that might be a mile or so away. In this case, after a couple of weeks, we would then swap them back. We thought this was hilarious and spent many a happy hour enjoying the thought of gnome holidays or neighbourly disputes. However, as I said earlier, this activity was only one of many, and I don't want or need forgiveness for this essentially harmless fun, especially as Noel Edmonds was actively encouraging this type of attack on the garden guardians around about this time. One night while walking down my street on a gnome hunt, I became aware that one particular type of wrought iron gate with black painted swirls of metal was quite common, and a pair or more occurred in almost every street, probably courtesy of the nearby blacksmiths who made them to order. This sort of hideous wrought iron work was very fashionable back then. It was then that a really sinister idea popped into my mind, and I ran home to fetch a tape measure. For the next few weeks, we went everywhere, trying to locate pairs of wrought iron gates and built up a list of locations and sizes. To our delight, we found a pair of gates just under 5 foot wide and another pair of identical ones that were just over 5 foot 2 inches wide. We came back to confirm our findings in daylight, and then the stage was set. The next Friday evening, we were allowed out to midnight on the weekend. We lifted a gate off its hinges and carried it nearly 2 miles to the location of the almost matching pair and did a straight swap. Another 2 miles later, the deed was half done. Now we had a pair of gates that only just latched closed and another that clumsily banged together and jammed. After a further 2 weekends, we completed the full deed to create a pair of gates that couldn't quite reach each other and another pair that banged together and wouldn't close at all. What fun we had imagining the confusion of the poor owners, who we were sure would never guess what had happened, as the distance was far enough to ensure that it was unlikely that their tales of grief would ever cross. After 2 weeks of chuckling, we decided it was time to reverse the deed and cause even more confusion. After 2 miles carrying the first quite heavy gate back to its original home, we found to our horror that the second owner had demolished the pillar and installed a new gatepost in order to accommodate the now smaller gates. Not knowing what to do, we decided it was best to keep at least one household happy, and we spent the early hours of the morning swapping both gates. One pair now fitted perfectly, and the other pair now overlapped. Because it took us until later than 2 o'clock in the morning to achieve the full switch, we were both grounded for nearly a month. At the time, I thought that was punishment enough, but now I feel the need to clear my debt to society. I would be grateful of a pardon. We never intended a permanent change, and I would say to those unsympathetic judges, brackets, Sister Pauline, close brackets, that the mitigating circumstances of total boredom on the Isle of Wight were partly to blame. If you can't find it in your hearts to forgive this mishap, then I may as well take the rest of my problems to my grave. However, if you can forgive this minor slip, then I'd be willing to serialise my confessions further. I await your verdict. Casey and Jones with that story of swapping gates and making them fit, and then others that didn't fit. Let's see what kind of mood she's in, Sister Pauline.
Well, these are quite powerful mitigating circumstances. Teenage boys, the Isle of Wight.
Yes.
The early 70s. What I can't really forgive, though, is the fact that they had to imagine. They felt it was okay to just imagine the consequences. How dull is that? Why weren't they watching the consequences? They're very boring. Do something, go away, imagine the consequences.
So they should have stayed to watch
They should
and
have
laugh.
lurked. in some way. They had nothing else to do. It was the Isle of Wight. It was the early 70s. No, I don't forgive you.
Okay, Mother Superior.
My mind slightly drifted off. They were grounded for 2 months. Is that because they were found out?
Because they, as I think was clearly stated by me just merely moments ago,
Sorry.
it's because they stayed out beyond midnight.
But no one knew what they'd done. That was why. Okay.
I'm glad you're paying close attention.
No, I just didn't quite get that. But then, as I said earlier, I'm not very bright. It seems an awful lot of trouble for sort of not much of a result, really. I mean, part of me wants to forgive them, but part of me says if they were my gates, I'd be very, very hacked off. So I'm kind of wavering. I don't know whether to forgive them or not. Isle of Wight, winter, not really an excuse. You're not forgiven.
All right, not forgiven. Took long enough to get there, yes.
You did ask.
Now, Brother Matt.
Thank goodness I didn't know you two when I was growing up. You sound the dullest. This is your idea of fun, is hulking wrought iron for 2 miles? That's PE. What's like 2 miles with wrought iron? Are you crazy?
But it was to make a gate that didn't exactly fit.
It didn't exactly fit. Ooh, crazy. How those winter nights clearly flew by on the Isle of Wight.
They lay in bed thinking, imagine that gate flapping in the wind
Imagine
now.
what the owner's doing now, but he just can't get his car in. Crazy. No, not forgiven, just for being dull.